Usually, it is a state of physical and mental well-being in a person, and poor health is often caused by diseases, which could either be communicable diseases. These are infectious diseases caused by pathogens that can be transferred between organisms, or the disease could be non-communicable, non-infectious, can't be transferred between organisms. In many cases, both groups of these diseases could interact to cause ill health. For instance, some viruses are known to cause cancer. The HPV virus has links with cervical cancer, and the hepatitis virus has links with liver cancer later on in life. Sometimes when an antigen invades your body will trigger an immune response to that antigen, and that response could trigger a non-communicable disease such as asthma. Pet allergies can cause asthma to develop in adults, and poor physical health can actually lead to poor mental health, such as depression. Often that's because if you're physically unwell, you are not capable of doing what you would like to be doing, and that can make you feel very low and lead to depression. So risk factors are factors that could increase the likelihood of you developing the disease. Some diseases are caused by several risk factors that actually interact with one another. Risk factors can actually be substances, which could be in the body or in the environment. Substances could be carcinogens. This means that they can cause cancer. Asbestos is a good example of this. It can be found in lots of old building materials before people realised the risks associated with asbestos. And basically, tiny little fibres are shed of these materials, inhaled. They could lead to cancers forming in the respiratory tract. Ionising radiation is also carcinogenic, cancer-causing, and examples of this would be UV radiation from the sun or X-ray radiation. Some aspects of lifestyle can also influence your risk of disease, and some risk factors include your diet, how much exercise you do, how much alcohol you consume, and whether or not you smoke. Lots of data actually exists to show a correlation between a risk factor and a non-communicable disease, such as the risk of smoking leading to the development of lung cancer. And you can see in this graph that the cigarette sales, from where this data was initially collected, has increased really, really quickly, really dramatically. It gets to a point where suddenly it starts to decrease. The sales drop in cigarettes, and we can put that down to public awareness of the risks associated with smoking that people didn't know about before this year here. And then looking at the number of lung cancer deaths, it's been broken down into those affecting males and females. You can see that there is an increase in lung cancer deaths in males and females. It's more prominent in males, but if cigarette sales have gone up and cases of lung cancer have gone up in both sexes, then one could suggest there is a link between the two. When there is a link between a risk and a disease, we could say that there is a correlation between the two. But that does not necessarily mean a causation. I just wanted to quickly point out here that there is a time lapse or a gap between when cigarette sales began and the first cases of lung cancer deaths here. You might be asked to suggest a reason for that gap, and a suggestion would be it takes a while for lung cancer to develop in a person. So can a risk ever actually cause a disease directly? In order to conclude that, we need to have a causal mechanism, so a biological explanation how that particular risk can actually cause that disease. And it's mainly due to the fact that cigarette smoke contains several different carcinogenic chemicals. And these carcinogens, or these chemicals, when they are inhaled, they trigger the cells in the lungs and the airways leading down to the lungs to divide uncontrollably. And when cells divide uncontrollably by mitosis, they form a tumour. If this tumour is benign, it is non-cancerous and doesn't spread. These cells will just divide uncontrollably until there is no space for them to divide anymore. If, however, a tumour spreads around the body and invades other tissues, and this happens when those tumorous cancer cells break off and circulate around the body, the tumour is said to be malignant and therefore cancerous, and if left untreated will be fatal. So there are different treatments available for cancers like lung cancers. The quicker they're spotted, the better, because once found, a tumour can be removed surgically if it's in a location that's accessible to surgeons. Some tumours unfortunately aren't. Some tumours are in a part of the brain that are inoperable, and there's very little that can be done there, but most of the time the tumour is removed. And to just ensure that none of those cells have actually migrated around the body, forming secondary tumours. The patient will receive either chemotherapy or radiotherapy or both. Chemotherapy uses drugs, i.e. chemicals, that either stop the tumour dividing, so stop division, or make those cancerous cells self-destruct. Radiotherapy, on the other hand, targets radiation at the cancer itself. However, both of these forms of treatment can actually affect some of the healthier cells, leading to some really nasty side effects. Smoking also affects the fetal development. Here you can see a graph that shows as the number of cigarettes smoked per day during pregnancy increases, the birth weight of the fetus once born gets lower and lower and lower. So is this a correlation or is this a causation? There's obviously a connection between cigarettes smoked and birth weight, but is it cigarettes that are directly affecting this birth weight? Is it a causation? Well, if we can find a biological explanation to explain the link between the two, then maybe it is a causation. And here it is. So cigarette smoke contains the gas carbon monoxide, so there's one oxygen atom in that compound. And the molecule that carries oxygen around the body, which is found in red blood cells, is called hemoglobin. Problem is, hemoglobin actually has a higher affinity for carbon monoxide than oxygen. If somebody's just inhaled smoke that contains carbon monoxide, the carbon monoxide is going to actually stick much better to the hemoglobin than the oxygen will. So the blood that's travelling around the body is going to be carrying around carbon monoxide instead of oxygen, and the mother that's inhaled that cigarette smokes, blood then passes to the placenta, and normally all the good stuff from the mother's blood travels from her blood stream into the blood vessels of the placenta, and those blood vessels belong to the developing fetus. And if the mother's blood is carrying less oxygen than necessary, then the fetus is going to get less oxygen, and the fetus is growing at an alarming rate. In order to do that effectively, it's going to need to have lots of oxygen. Lack of oxygen is going to lead to a slower development. A slower development will lead to a low birth weight, which could severely have an impact on the fetus's chances of survival. Now, cardiovascular disease is a major non-communicable disease that is actually influenced by loads and loads of risk factors. Now, the actual symptoms and treatments of cardiovascular disease have been covered in another video, so please do check that out if you haven't already done so. So let's look at some of these risk factors, smoking included. So let's start there. Now, cigarette smoke actually damages the blood vessels. And when there's damage to a blood vessel, that could lead to fatty deposits building up in those blood vessels. When this happens, you have something called coronary heart disease, which is one aspect of cardiovascular disease. Narrow blood vessels are not a good thing. Diet has a massive impact on cardiovascular disease. If you have a diet that's very high in fat, it could increase your cholesterol levels. And cholesterol is a type of lipid that your body does make, but if you eat a diet high in saturated fats, animal fats, then you can actually increase what's known as bad cholesterol. And this bad cholesterol also contributes to the buildup of these fatty deposits, causing coronary heart disease. Sticking with the theme of diet, some diets are very high in salt, especially those that contain lots of processed food. Lots of frozen and microwavable meals have loads of salt in them to keep them from spoiling. And high salt can actually increase blood pressure. And when this happens, the blood vessels can get damaged, and that's another symptom of cardiovascular disease. It's worth noting as well that really in developed countries, people eat high fat and high salt diets. So cardiovascular disease is a disease of the richer nations. So not only are your lifestyle choices influencing your risk of disease here, but also whereabouts you live. Coming back to blood pressure, stress is another risk factor. And the reason why is stress actually releases these hormones, stress hormones, that narrow blood vessels, and a narrow vessel would lead to an increase in pressure of that blood vessel. And if you have a poor diet, you could develop obesity, where you become severely overweight. This is also linked to a lack of exercise. Both of those factors together actually lower your sensitivity to insulin. And insulin is a hormone that is there to control your blood glucose levels. When you lose the ability to control your blood sugar levels, you have what's known as diabetes, which in itself is a non-communicable disease, but often diabetes can influence and is therefore a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Another lifestyle factor that influences non-communicable diseases is alcohol, and it primarily affects two organs, which are the liver and the brain. The liver actually breaks down alcohol along with other toxins or poisons, but this chemical reaction actually damages the cells of the liver, and sometimes they are so damaged that they become scar tissue, and when that happens, a patient or a person develops cirrhosis, which is a very serious condition. Alcohol has also been shown to damage brain cells and can lead to loss of volume in the brain, and loss of volume would impair brain function. And some might believe that you have to abuse alcohol for a long period of time, for many, many years, to develop these problems. But actually, a few occasions of binge drinking where you might not drink all the time, but when you do, you really go for it, that just speeds up the process. So it is equally as damaging as a long-term regular abuse of alcohol. Alcohol also affects the fetus, and it can cause something called fetal alcohol syndrome, which are characterized by very distinct facial deformities. If the baby is lucky enough to be born, alcohol consumption during pregnancy can cause miscarriages, can cause stillbirths, but if a child is born with fetal alcohol syndrome, they often have massive problems with their major organs. Now, non-communicable diseases come at a huge cost, a personal cost because they lead to a very premature loss of life, but there is also a huge financial burden to the NHS in terms of treating these diseases as well as conducting research on these diseases, and often, rather than study the whole population, they use sample data. But yet these costs can be lowered if people change their lifestyle and limit their exposure to ionising radiation. A person's own genetic makeup can predispose them to non-communicable diseases. An example of this is BRCA gene, which is linked to ovarian and breast cancer. Knowledge of actually having this genetic predisposition can influence a person's choice to reduce other known risk factors. They will have the tissue that contains these ticking time bombs removed as a precaution. So there we have a video on those risk factors and non-communicable diseases. Once your knowledge is secure in the links between these risk factors and the diseases that they are linked to, then practice analysing data, because you're very likely to be faced with some form of a graph or a table of data to analyse in relation to this topic.